Thank you. Good afternoon. You know, we teach a course at Values Coach on personal values. It's called the 12 Core Action Values. And in that course, core action value number 10 is enthusiasm. Can we try this again? Good afternoon. That's what I was expecting from this group. Thank you very much. Hey, before we start, can I tell you about my daughter Annie? These guys want to hear, so the rest of you don't have a choice. Annie is working on a PhD in neurobiology research. I don't have a clue what she's talking about, but I know she's very smart. But Annie is one of those kids who was born going 180 miles an hour, just charging through life like an out-of-control rocket. And when Annie was a little toddler, about 18 months old, we went to visit my wife's parents. You know, the visit to the grandparents? And Annie is racing around this new house, exploring, tearing things apart. She comes charging in through the living room at the only speed she knows, 180 miles an hour. And Grandpa's in there. Now, Grandpa spends a lot of time on the lake, so he's very tan. He is also as bald as a cue ball. And he's sitting there in his reading chair, got on these little square Ben Franklin reading glasses, book in his lap, and he comes racing in 180 miles an hour, pigtails flopping up and down. She runs smack dab into Grandpa, stops dead cold in her tracks. Her eyes pop open, her jaw drops down, and she just stares. Any parents in the room? You know how inquisitive a toddler can be, don't you? And you know how honest a toddler can be. And she stares and stares. And then she laughs, looks over at Grandma and says, "Grandma, I have a Mr. Potato Head too." And isn't it true that you and I can both look at a third person and think we see somebody totally different, based on the most superficial of things, the costume they wear to work, the car they drive? I used to be chief operating officer of a big hospital in Massachusetts. I'm a recovering hospital administrator now. It's true. I have a sponsor, I go to meetings, the whole works. About every 3 months, I spent half a day wearing a housekeeper costume and doing that job, scrubbing floors, scrubbing toilets. Tell me, do you think I got treated the same when I was wearing my housekeeper costume as when I was wearing my executive costume? Totally different. I'm the same person I was when I put the tie on this morning, but I get treated totally different. And a part of our challenge in healthcare is how do we start treating each other with a greater level of respect and civility? And that includes looking past the costume somebody's wearing and seeing the human being behind it. Isn't it true? You and I can both look at the same situation and give it a completely different interpretation. Doesn't that happen all the time? In healthcare today, tell me, is it the best of times or the worst of times? Yeah, the answer is yes. What do you choose to see? There are a lot of people whining and complaining about healthcare reform, but from the perspective of the patients that you serve every day, it is certainly the best of times. You're doing medical miracles. Every single day, people are being wheeled into hospitals in wheelchairs. 20 years ago, their next stop was skilled nursing, but because of the kind of work you can do now, they're walking out with a brand new hip, a brand new knee or an ankle, and they're going to the golf course. What do you think they say, best of times, worst of times? Folks, this is what's known as audience participation. You want to know how it works? I'll tell you, in the work we do, one of the most inspiring and heartbreaking things I experience, I meet amazing people. I meet people who are good at what they do. They're passionate about what they do. They're committed. And yet, as I get a chance to talk to them one-on-one, I recognize that they, like me, and like you, if you're being honest with yourself, have a little voice in the back of their head. You know the one I mean? The one that says, "You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You don't deserve that because you're just you." Am I the only one that ever hears that? They have been listening to that for so long, they've started to believe it. And that's all negative self-talk is. It is telling yourself lies, believing those lies, and by acting as if they were true, they become your reality. I love this picture. And isn't that a great metaphor? Because it raises a really good question, doesn't it? Who could you be if you could look in the mirror and instead of pretending to see Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head looking back at you, you could, and instead of just seeing who's there now, who you really are now, what if you could look in the mirror and see your best self looking back at you? Who could you be if you didn't let fear stop you from doing what you have to do to be that best self? From confronting that person who's acting inappropriately. Beyond that, how different would your department, your division be if every one of your colleagues could look in the mirror and see their best self looking back at them? I love this bumper sticker. I used to have superhuman powers, but my therapist took them all away. And isn't that what happens? If you ask a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do they think they can be? Astronaut, Batman, Superman, president. Who'd want to be? They think they can be anything. Have you ever asked a little kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And had them say, oh, I want to sit in a dark cubicle and do spreadsheets till I get laid off. But what happens? We run into parents and teachers and schoolyard bullies and eventually bosses and toxic coworkers. And those dreams get ground out of us. And part of the challenge of leadership is helping people remember, reclaim, respark, revitalize those dreams.